Get something. Okay, I think we're recording now. So again, I'm Dr. Yo. You're watching Beyond Nagging, empowering parents to help their children write their common applications. Tonight we'll be talking about the essay. We've been going for a few minutes. I forgot to push record, so you missed. I just did a recap of topics we've covered, but we are up to the point where Dr. Yo asked, "Does anybody have any follow-up questions from any of the prior sessions?" Specifically about the activities, because I know I presented a lot of information and left very little time for questions. So if you have questions, either just unmute yourself and ask, or you can raise your hand with this high-tech Zoom tool. I think if you click chat or participants, you get the option to raise your hand. But in the absence of questions, I will plow forward because I am prepared. I am going to put, for those of you here, the outline for tonight's chat in the chat box. How do you like that for appropriateness? So here it is. And for those of you watching the video, I'm going to, for a moment, share my screen and show you the outline and just talk you through it. So we're going to talk about the goal of the personal essay. Many people think this is, the biggest, hardest thing. It may take the most blood, sweat, and tears. It is not the most important aspect of your Common App, as I discussed yesterday, in my opinion. I think the most important section of your Common App is the activities list, and you can read all about it in my book or call me and I'll tell you about it, or you can watch the video. But this is also important, but it's very different. It's very different in purpose. It's very different in how you should approach it, how your kids should approach it. The goal of the essay, unlike the goal of the previous two sections, right? The goal of the previous two sections is to be impressive and, yes, to brag. The previous two sections are your activities list and the comment forms. And there you want to present yourself in the best possible light in your best hour of your best day. That's how we write resumes. Nobody reads a resume and says, oh, they're bragging. You're supposed to brag, and there's a place to brag. It's the best stuff I've ever done, and that's why I'm looking for work for you, is what the resume says. Likewise, your simple forms and your activities are your opportunity to brag, to say as lustily as you can all the great things that you think that you've done academically, extracurricularly, athletically, community service-wise. That's the place to brag. Your essay is you want to make them fall in love with you. That's a line I steal from Tina Fey in the movie Admission, which is actually taken from the book Admission, which was written by a Princeton admissions officer, a reader who was hired a number of years ago when they were overwhelmed with applications, and she wrote a tell-all book. I think they were upset with it, so she replied by selling the book rights to Hollywood, and now everybody can see how to get into Princeton. But the key thing, I assign it as an optional homework assignment in my boot camp. But she says the goal of your application is to make them fall in love with you. That's the goal of your essay. Try to make someone fall in love with you, listing your GPA and your test scores and your activity accomplishments. That's your brag sheet. But you want to make them fall in love with you. And I really emphasize this among parents because all very well-intentioned parents steer their kids in the wrong direction by advising them to write about impressive things. Oh, write about that community service thing or that leadership thing we sent you to sophomore year. Oh, this was impressive or that. That's really the wrong place to do it. You definitely want to write about the leadership conference or the community service thing you did in 10th grade and brag about it to the extent that you can honestly brag about it in the activity section or in the other forms up to the essay. But the essay is where it's a personal essay where you want to win them over. And I'm going to read 3 examples that highlight accomplishments without being braggy. That's really the big goal. I'm also going to talk about bad topics versus bad treatments of topics. I'm going to go through the list of what I think are the most common mistakes. Then I'm going to talk about, I have like 12 in my book, Hallmarks of an Effective Essay. I really want to emphasize the top 3 that all essays have in common, even though they're remarkably different. And then I'm going to give you an effective formula. I'll give a couple others in subsequent classes. Tonight, my favorite effective formula for the 650-word essay, and that's the maximum limit. They're usually between 500 and 65 words. Minimum limit is 250. My favorite formula is the before and after. Like I'm talking to mostly parents, so, that's the one when we were growing up where they would have like before, after, and, you'd buy the diet pills because the pictures were so dramatic. So this is an essay formula where you do a before picture of yourself with an anecdote and an after. And then I'll end with an example of how to write I surmounted a challenge essay, which is a very common topic. It's one of their choices and one that kids will talk about, whether it was not making the varsity soccer team after trying, or having a big injury that barred you from a season of sports, or not getting placed in the honors class, but succeeding in any way despite the odds. It's very difficult to write that without looking for pity. And nobody, that's not a winning essay. That's not likable. It doesn't make them fall in love with you. But you can write about surmounting challenges if you turn a negative into a positive. And I'm going to share a really good example of that a young woman wrote last summer in my boot camp. So that's the outline. It's in your chat. I'm going to go back to just full screen view because I prefer it. And I'll put it on gallery here. Okay, so let me just launch right in. If you have questions, please, it's a small group I see. Don't stand in ceremony. Don't wait to the end. Just unmute yourself and interrupt me. I do that to you. No, I hope I wouldn't, but feel free. Just chime right in with any question that you have. Okay, so I talked already about making them fall in love with you. By the way, if you want a great family movie to watch with your kids that's right on time, if they're writing applications, do rent Netflix or DVD, whatever. It's a big Hollywood movie. Stars Tina Fey and Paul Rudd. Something for the guys, something for the girls of all persuasions. And it's a really funny romantic comedy, but I assign it, obviously, the whole subplot is how to get into college. And it's a very funny treatment, but it has a lot of really good information and shows kind of the farce of making some common mistakes, which a lot of times is bragging. Also bribing, cheating, and lying, which we all know Rick Singer's in jail for. Okay, first major topic I want to hit is bad topics versus bad treatment of topics. You will hear advisors, sometimes even admissions officers, talk about bad topics. There are no bad topics. A lot of teachers say, you can't write an essay about camp. You can't write an essay about sports. Nonsense. You can write excellent essays and get into the world's most selective colleges with both of those topics. There is, however, bad treatments of topics. The reason that you don't want to write, or a lot of people, a lot of professionals, steer you away from writing, say, about sports, is that it's really hard not to brag writing about that. What you don't want to do is write the essay where it was late in the fourth quarter and we were down by 6. We had the ball on our 3-yard line and everyone was leaving the stands. There was only 30 seconds to play. Nobody thought we could win. But I dug deep and I put everything into that perfect spiral, and there was my best friend streaking for the goal. And he caught touchdown. We win. I'm the hero of this story. And that, of course, is ugly, and nobody would enjoy reading that. It's not likable, and you just got rejected, most likely, unless you're so good at football you're being recruited. But you get my point, is you can't brag. You don't want to be the hero of the story. You do want to show yourself in a positive light, but you've got to do it subtly. So there are no bad topics. There are only bad treatments of topics. I'll give you a really good example of what could potentially be a bad topic, but ended up being brilliant because of the way the young man treated it. I live in a town where one of the 2 big public schools is Hall High School. Some of you have heard of it. Hall High School is noted for, among many things, it's a great public school, but probably the crown jewel is their jazz program. They have a jazz band that wins national competitions every year. In fact, they won at Berklee College of Music so many years in a row, they were literally banned from the competition. They said for a decade, they said, you win every year, it's no fun for the other schools. We'll let you come and perform as kind of an exemplar of what a band can be, but you can't compete. And I believe that was around 10 years. And then they said, all right, it's been long enough. We're going to let you back in. And sure enough, they won the next year. Anyway, being in the concert jazz band in Hall is a big deal. It means, you're a really, really good musician as a teenager. And so a lot of people say, well, you can't write about that. That's like being the star football player and writing about your touchdown pass. Well, no. One of my favorite essays is this kid wrote about how in rehearsals leading up to the Pops and Jazz show, which is 6 shows in school, and they take it on the road and they go to Europe, they have professional length and professionally run quality rehearsals, sometimes 6 hours at a time. And there are drill sergeants there, and you have to sit with your instrument while they're rehearsing another section, absolutely silently. So this boy wrote an essay about, he learned how to deal with silence. He learned how to meditate and what to do with a saxophone in his hand for 20 minutes when he couldn't make a sound. And it was really cool. And it showed a lot about this kid and his introspection and, the way his mind worked. And he learned a really valuable activity, namely meditation. But it was said in the context of the concert jazz band at Hall. Enough said. So it was kind of what I would call a very subtle, low-key, subtextual brag. So no bad topics. Don't stray away from topics, just bad treatments of them. Here are some common mistakes you don't want to make. I see them all the time, and I hear about them ad nauseum from professional college admissions officers. The most common mistake is the first two in the outline. The narrative version of your activities list. Basically, it's a recap of everything they just learned in your activity section, only now you've written it in grammatically correct sentences and somehow organized them into paragraphs. Number one, wasting their time, totally redundant. Number two, boring. Number three, it's going to be braggy by nature. If you did a good job bragging in your activities list, bad idea, doesn't get anyone in. So then another common mistake like that one is, well, let me choose one activity and just talk a lot about it. No, it can be said in one activity, like the example I gave of the kid playing in the jazz band, but it really wasn't about jazz band at all. That was just the context. And that's a really effective strategy. I'm going to read you one of my favorite essays tonight. I'm going to read you one from this book called 50 Successful Harvard Essays. And I'm going to read you two from this book called The Common App Handbook, written with some help from me, but by my students over the last couple of years, that are really good examples of how much you can get in about yourself that, you know, that's impressive, that could be braggy, but they're just told in passing as part of the narrative. They're part of the story. We're not saying them because we want to draw your attention to them. We're telling you because it's part of the story. And I'll exemplify that work to the couple essays. The third essay, I already gave you an example, the overt brag, the football player. I'm the hero of this story. Or even, and this is number 6, the single most commonly mentioned topic that college admissions officers don't want to hear, because one, they find it almost like disingenuous, and two, it's just so common that you're just like everybody else, is I went to Argentina on a service trip, and I thought I was going to help the indigent, poverty-stricken, no toothbrush community down there, and what I discovered was they helped me more than I helped them. Now, that's a beautiful sentiment. It's probably a little oversell. It's probably unlikely that seeing them smile as they kicked around the one soccer ball that the whole neighborhood owned helped you more than you helped them by bringing them clothes and toothbrushes and teach them about dental hygiene and building wings on their schools. But we get your point. But the point is so overmade and overdone and overused that don't do it. Don't do it. I mean, everyone says don't do that one. That's another kind of overt brag. I went to help them, but they helped me. It's either an overt or the subtle brag. The next one, this is where you brag about honors and accolades that you sprinkle in at every possible juncture. This is just like the thing I did, or this reminds me of the time that I won. And again, I get your inclination to do that, and I tell students, great that you have all that stuff. Put it where it belongs. In the simple forms, there's a whole form for academic honors and accolades. There's and put in the activities where there's 10 places, plus an additional information spillover box I talked about, where you can detail all the honors you want. And it doesn't sound like bragging. It sounds like a resume, which is what it's supposed to sound like. Okay, and then the I deserve your pity, and I say, like, there's always a bigger fish. There's always a more pitiable fish. Pity is hard to sell. Hard to make people fall in love with you just on pity alone. But I'm going to read you a really great essay about a girl who had a topic that a lot of professionals say, no, don't do that. You're looking for pity. But I'll just tell you, she wrote about ballet was this kid's life, loved to dance. Ballet was her favorite form of dancing, and suffered a severe injury that sidelined her for months and months and months, and it was horrible. But what she discovered in her convalescent process was that what she really loved about dancing in the first place. So it really celebrates her passion and love of dancing, even though it tells a heartbreaking story that could cross over into I'm looking for pity. But you'll agree with me, you love the essay. I read it and I weep. It's really beautiful. So that's coming up at the end, and you'll have to wait with suspense for 10 more minutes to see what she actually fell in love with ballet and why she continues to do it as a 17-year-old young woman, 18 now. Okay, any questions so far? I know I speak fast, and I'm hopped up on Diet Coke caffeine. Alrighty then, we're plowing ahead. I list in my book about a dozen hallmarks or qualities of excellent essays. These are the top 3. I would say essays are so different from tone to style to subject matter to overall impression. I tell kids essays are like individuals, which if you remember from kindergarten, everybody had the class on how we're all snowflakes, and snowflakes might look all the same, but if we look at them carefully, no two snowflakes are alike. Same thing with essays. They're very, very different. Having said that, there's some things all snowflakes have in common. They're all made up of water crystals and whatnot. Maybe they are just one water crystal. I have to review my notes on snowflakes. But there are common qualities that run through all effective essays. And here are the top three. So if you're going to advise your kids, which is what this class is about, I would focus on three things. The first one is that you got to be passionate. You can't just drum up a topic because you think it'll sell. It's got to be something you really care about. You write about what you know is what they always teach you in writing classes if you go away to summer writing program. Write about what you love. Write about what you care about. I read an essay, I think I mentioned it last week. One of the most memorable essays I read was a kid who got into Northeastern, one of the hardest schools in the country to get into. That a couple years ago, it was the #1 most applied to school. He wrote about his hobby of turning quarters into rings, beautiful rings, using tools in the garage, power tools with sparks and solder and melting stuff. And he loved it. And he wrote about the process and how he discovered it. And it was great. And you could tell how into it he was. And it was just so easy to fall in love with the kid because he was so passionate about this very quirky hobby. So start with something that you love or that that you feel passionate about. If you're writing about a subject about which you genuinely are passionate, the passion will come through. It's easy to fall in love with people who are excited about what they're doing and what they're talking about. I was talking today in boot camp about how I personally don't collect stamps. I never really was that interested in it, and I don't really get it, but I can imagine, if somebody was pointing out their favorite stamps, like, look at this one, there's only so many made in the whole world, and they were printed here, and look at the detail in the quartz, the only stamp like that, and suddenly they're like, wow, that's pretty cool. That's because you're catching a vicarious buzz off their passion for stamp collecting. So hey, philately can be contagious if you're a genuine philatelist. The second thing all good essays is they show some level of introspection. One of the great ways not to be braggy, and I'm going to read you two really good examples, are presenting a before and after picture. These aren't declarative essays in the sense that you're telling them what happened, you're showing them through stories. So you present a picture of, it's sort of what Mark Twain does in Huck Finn. Right? He presents Huck as saying, oh, I was wicked and ornery and low down because I wanted to help this guy Jim down the river. And he's saying, we know, the reader, no, that's right. You're appealing to your higher laws and your conscience. How good for you. But it's presented in a less than attractive light using words like I was wicked and low down and ornery. You can present, in one of the essays, the kid presents himself as getting into tiffs with grown adults because they said he talked too fast. And his before picture was, you guys are stupid. You're not concentrating. My friends don't have a problem. And then he went off to Argentina and he discovered how frustrating it can be to try to converse with people who are talking too fast. And it gave him this epiphany on how language is really important and it separates us from animals. And it's really important to talk slowly enough. I should learn this lesson, such that people can truly understand and communicate with you. Brilliant essay. And another one that a kid wrote in my boot camp not last summer, about 5 summers ago. He just graduated from Georgetown, so I know the essay was effective. And he wrote about how an early accident as a child made him very frightened of taking risks. And he presents himself as before, he says, I was not a risk taker. I was cautious Colin. And I didn't want, I wanted safety and protection. And I discovered a lot of comfort in the world of numbers because numbers are safe and numbers are always give you the same right answer. And then as he grew up, he discovered, well, sometimes there isn't just one answer. Sometimes the numbers don't add up. Sometimes it's worth taking calculated risks. And he presents an after picture and another anecdote about a little boy who he encouraged to take a morning dip in the frigid Long Island Sound at a camp he was a counselor at. And so he presents this before after picture that shows growth and maturity and introspection. And then that leads me directly to the third thing, which is by genre, personal essays are anecdotal. They're little stories that you tell. And the reason they are, it's not that you have to do it that way. You want to because they're more memorable. Right? If you think about what you remember from literature, it's probably the stories, the moments, the little seeds the images, not the essays. You may have written some great essays are much harder to remember. You have to like, what were Olive Emerson's point in self-reliance? It's one of my favorite essays, but you know, I remember a lot of the imagery from it. But if you just tell, it's very easy to forget. And when admissions officers are reading hundreds, thousands of essays, you want them to remember you, and they can peg a little image or a story much easier than tell. So let me, with only a few minutes to go, let me read these essays because I think you'll find them really instructive in light of what I said. I want you to listen for passion. Are they introspective? Do they show maturity and growth rather than just claim I grew and matured greatly as a result of my trip? That's not very sellable. Are they anecdotal? Do they tell stories? So the first one is the very first essay. It's my favorite one in 50 Successful Harvard Essays. It's called You Speak Too Fast. And when I say that there's a title, You Speak Too Fast, kids immediately, oh, do I have to have a title? The answer is no, you don't have to have a title. Can you have a title? Yes, if it's clever, if it's good, if it's indicative. Do not have a snoozer title. My college essay, what I learned from my trip, you know, my hobby, boring, stupid, wasting your words. But if you can think of something clever, I love a clever title. This one's not too clever, but it indicates what it's about. It's called You Speak Too Fast. It started with my grandmother. You're going to have to speak more slowly, honey, she would say, interrupting me as we spoke on the phone. I hadn't viewed my grandmother, a frail elderly woman, as a credible gauge of my intelligibility. Her hearing must be failing, I thought, or perhaps her 1970s era telephone needed to be replaced. My father was next. I cannot understand a word you're saying, he exclaimed over dinner, flecks of food flying from his mouth. My mother would stick up for me. Leave the boy alone, she would say. I can understand him just fine. It's your hearing that's off. And then, one day, the dam broke. I'm sorry, Scotty, my mom said with a tinge of regret in her voice. You speak too fast. I have no idea what you're saying. The transition had happened over the course of months. While I had once been a child easily understood by the world, I was now a fast-talking teenager whose language was only understood by someone from Generation Y. It's a little dated now. Among my friends, communication was easy. With adults, one needed a bilingual translator, perhaps a 20-something. But I remained incredulous. Adults just needed to focus more. I thought I was speaking at a perfectly appropriate speed. Now notice, I'll editorialize just a bit. That's the before picture. Grown-ups are dumb. Pay attention, silly mom, silly dad, silly grandma. All my friends understand me. Now, that's very likable because we know he's casting himself in an unseemly light and he's going to change. It's the Huck Finn before picture, right? Compare that to it was late in the fourth quarter and I heaved my best spiral ever, right? This is likable, right? I knew I was speaking fine. Concentrate. And then the dun-dun-dun moment. I always love the dun-dun-dun. Here it is. This summer, I finally began to understand my parents' struggle. 4 months ago, I traveled to Argentina to be a high school exchange student. Now notice, he doesn't say, I'm a geek, I like to learn, Spanish is my thing. Look how subtly he puts this. I was excited at the prospect of taking classes entirely in Spanish. It would be my chance to attain fluency. Great, you love this kid. He's not, in a way he's bragging, he's talking about, oh, I'm a geek, I want to learn a fluent language, but he's passionate. You can tell he's sincere. I remember feeling that way when I went to France. Gosh, I hope I get fluent and dream in French by the time I come home. And that's a good goal for a kid, for a student. In school, I made many Argentine friends, but speaking quickly to them seemed to be a sport. Suddenly, I was the one who was struggling to extract words from slurred discourse. What do you do on weekends? I would ask. Well, a boy would start. That well was the wind-up before a long headfirst dive. We, clubs, night, but if pizza, then camp, park, look, dawn. Suddenly I was the one who didn't speak the language. For 5 years, again, watch the subtext here and how easily it slips under the radar and it sells him as likable. For 5 years, I had studied Spanish. I had taken classes, read books outside of school, and tutored math students in Spanish. But none of that prepared me to speak the language of the Argentine high school student. Pretty clever, right? We learn a lot about some of his accolades without him sounding braggy at all. I would strain. Every understood sentence was hard fought, but eventually I began to sound like my grandmother. I would say, "You're going to have to speak more slowly." The look I would receive in return was one of skepticism. Then they would ask the inevitable question, "Are you sure there's nothing wrong with your hearing?" So it's come full circle. By the end of 7 weeks, my Argentine high school friends had learned to speak slightly more slowly, and I had learned slightly more Argentine high school Spanish. Back in California, my parents sometimes still complain. Now we get the after picture. Notice he doesn't say, "As a result of this experience, I matured greatly, and now I know some things I didn't know before." That would be boring and dull and not likable. But he presents the after picture where he's slim and he's lost all the weight. The diet pills work, is what it says. Right? Back in California, my parents still sometimes complain that I speak too fast, but in their presence, I have learned to slow down as best I can, because to be understood through words and their subtleties is what sets humans apart. Only through clear communication, now we get down to his passion. Only through clear communication can I connect with others. I need to hear what people say, and I need to be heard. Whether it be in my monthly newspaper column, ooh, good little subtext there, young man, or in daily conversation, my words can have power. Perhaps words can persuade someone to stand up for an ideal. Or maybe they can find the beauty in something as mundane as an old swing set. We all go through life seeking to understand and to be understood, to speak the language of those who surround us, and sometimes that means slowing down just a little bit. Now, he could have ended it there. It would have been an A. He still would have gotten in, I'm sure, everywhere. But he clinches it with yet another anecdote. Notice this is all story after story. Very little narrative, just the last couple of paragraphs. And now back to his story. In my American high school, I see my friend Daniel Paredes, a recent immigrant from Mexico who is struggling to learn English. He has recently been mainstreamed in English classes, and I ask him how it's going. "My geometry class is a nightmare," he tells me in Spanish. "Why is it so difficult?" I ask. "Well, you wouldn't understand," Daniel says with an embarrassed tone. "Tell me," I say sympathetically. "It's just that I know the English. I know the words she's saying, but she says them so fast." He trails off. I look at Daniel and smile with commiseration. I understand exactly what you mean. That's a good one. That's a good one. That got him into Harvard. Any questions or comment or discussion about that? If you're willing to say just 2 words, I'll read one more essay, not 2. I'll save the ballet one for next week. I'll keep you in suspense about what she loved about ballet. But I would like to read one more before, after. That was written right in my presence during a Common App boot camp. Young men graduated from Georgetown. And if you'll indulge me, this will take 2 minutes. I'll read it through. I won't editorialize. You'll get it. It's before, after, and shows his passion for numbers, even though I'm pretty sure he didn't major in math at Georgetown. This is called from a famous quote from a football player, as you'll find out as I read the essay. It's called "Numbers Don't Lie." Numbers don't lie. Ever since the age of 4, I have been one to err on the side of caution. No thanks, I don't want to play tackle football. No, I have no interest in jumping off the high diving board. I liked reading and playing Clue. I like flag football and swimming. Inspired by the majestic flight of Moonface, the horned owl, and Zaboomafoo, I once decided to imitate his swift travel by gliding around my house in socks. Who hasn't done that? I rounded a corner, slipped, and fell face first into the leg of a couch. After spilling both blood and tears and requiring stitches in my right eyebrow, at the age of 4, I made some important, permanent changes. And so again, this is the before picture, and he's sort of with, a wink, tongue in cheek, talking about how he used to be. I think it's a very effective strategy. I've made some important permanent changes. I would always weigh my options before making decisions. I would eschew impulsivity. People get hurt when they're impulsive. I would be knowledgeable. I would be safe. I would always be right. Weighing pros and cons became my obsession. Addition and subtraction were my comfort zone. If I were careful, which of course I was, it was hard to be wrong. As I grew older, the more math I did, the more I saw it in other school subjects and other areas of my life. By the time I arrived in high school, Comparisons were endless. Perhaps I was a Pythagorean in a former life. Pythagoras founded a cult based on everything in the world can be reduced to math. Whether in economics, religion, American literature, or poetry, I saw the world, not just math and science, through numbers. The Scarlet Letter, one of my favorite books, is strictly and severely patterned. The 24 chapters are designed symmetrically, as are the 3 scaffold scenes at the beginning, middle, and end. I brought math to poetry too, seeing numbers in its rhyme schemes, meters, and lines per stanza. Same with Shakespearean plays, each with 5 acts, and sonnets, each with 3 quatrains and a couplet, all in iambic pentameter. In many religions, numbers are symbols of divinity. Look at the Trinity or the 3 sons of Cronus. Richard Sherman, 2-time All-Pro cornerback for Seattle Seahawks, now my beloved San Francisco 49ers, waxed eloquent when he said, "Women lie, men lie, numbers don't lie." I believe in this statement wholeheartedly. I believe in numbers. If one has decided to always be right, math is a great world in which to live. Crunching numbers has helped me succeed far beyond the narrow confines of calculus tests, from my choate fantasy football league to intense card games with my family to calculating angles during the 4th quarter of a water polo match. So again, notice he does mention water polo, which they'll remember from his activities, but it's not to brag about that. It's because he's talking about math and it helped him figuring out angles late in the 4th quarter. That's very responsible use of your activities. In high school, however, here's the turning point. I began to recognize that math is far less black and white than I had thought. Sometimes there are multiple right answers, sometimes none at all, and sometimes answers that simply blow your mind. Take, for instance, the numbers 0.9 bar and 1. Are they equal? I can prove it mathematically, but they certainly don't look it. And as John Green pointed out, some infinities are larger than others. I luxuriate in such mind-boggling dilemmas. Similarly, if I caught my best friend cheating under the honor system, would it be right to do nothing? To turn him in? Neither, both. Sometimes, as in math, there is no solution. Sometimes the numbers don't add up. I get weepy, it's so good. Aghast, here's the great ending. Again, another little anecdote to slam it home and be memorable. Aghast as 4-year-old Stephen might be, I now see the value in making mistakes and taking calculated risks. I don't want to miss opportunities or experiences simply because the numbers don't add up. Every morning this summer, as a swim instructor, so again, responsibly dipping into his activity tool to tell this story about numbers don't lie. So let's see, every morning this summer as a swim instructor, I asked a group of 5-year-olds to leave the safety of a dock to join me in the frigid Long Island Sound. I saw my former self in many of their faces, especially that of cautious Colin, who spent more time crying than swimming that summer. Finally, on the penultimate day of class, Colin decided to take a risk and jump in. His bravery was inspiring. So inspiring, in fact, I caught myself looking around for a high diving board. Another good one. When you weep, you know they're good, right? I mean, do we all admit that? Like, it's anecdotal, it's passionate, it talks about something he cared a lot about, shows introspection about how he realized, based on an early childhood traumatic experience, how he made some important lifelong changes, and how he rethought those changes as he learned more and developed. I mean, that's a gold standard right there. So that's what I was trying to illustrate. Are there any questions or comments about any of that? I just at you again. I'm sorry, but such is the nature of covering a lot of material. But I'm happy to take questions or comments or anything.
Hey, Mike, this might be for next week question, but how do you guide kids to kind of follow these patterns?
Yeah, okay, great question. I help them in my boot camp and in the book. I have tons of exercises, but there are many ways. And yeah, if you don't mind, I'll put up to next week. I'll just give you one. I mean, one way is I talk about this before after paradigm. It's a, it's kind of a formula, if you will. And that sometimes gets them thinking. Another really good way to do it is I call this retro engineering your essay. So you think, what are the messages? If I wrote a great essay that I was really proud of and did what I wanted it to do, it made me likable, it cast me in a good light, and it showed, these academic interests or personal goals or whatever. What are those messages? And then I think, what stories, I retro engineer it, would lead to those messages, right? It's sort of like if they said, and in your application, we want you to send in one photograph, one high resolution photograph. Imagine, oh my God, what should I wear? Should it be in the fall, the winter? Should it be outside? Should it be inside? Should I be doing something? Should I be shaking someone's hand? Should it be me in a group? Should it just be, oh my God, what photo? And the truth is, if it's a good photo of you, it doesn't matter any of that stuff. A good photo of you, like I'm looking at a good photo of you right now, Stephanie, because you're off screen. And what makes it a good photo isn't your outfit or the background, not that they heard, but I immediately, oh, that's Stephanie. Like I know her immediately, right? And I can see your personality is coming through because it's sharp, it's in focus, it's clear. So, I take a lot of pressure off. Your topic isn't what's important. It's injecting you into it. It's like, you feel like you probably know these two kids. If they walked on campus, you'd be like, I bet you're the kid who wrote that Numbers Don't Lie, right? After 3 sentences, because it's clear. So one way to do that is if what messages do I want to leave them with in a 2-minute read? And then what stories of the million pictures I could pull up, there's a story that I know that happened to me that will lead to that conclusion. So I call that retro engineering it. But, oh, shucks. I see someone tried to join us but can't get in. Oh, well, too late now. That's Kelly Harper, a friend of Stephanie's and mine. We'll get her in next week. And thank God I remembered to record it so she can. I'll share more of that next week, but I hope that helps a little.
That is good. Thanks.
Okay, great. Any other questions or comments? I appreciate it. We're about 10 minutes over. I don't mind, but I know when I'm invited to something that's supposed to be a half hour on my summertime, I want it to be a half hour, damn it. So I think I should sign off on that note. I thank you all for coming. Next week, we'll talk some more about the essay. And then I've got a whole bunch of other topics. Once we finish the essay, then we move into how to write supplements and do the supplement part of the application. And then that can be supported with a whole bunch of ancillary activities like visiting the school and what you can do to support your candidacy each time you visit and communicate with college reps. And so there's a lot more to come once we finish each of the parts of the application itself. So I thank you for your time and attention, and I hope to see you all next week on Beyond Nagging.